Hi, good morning, all of you. Today is 18th of June, Saturday, 2022, and this session is being organized by The Mentoring, a charity based in Cardiff that supports vulnerable people through mentoring in the areas of education, employment, health, and community engagement. So, welcome and thank you all for joining in today. Those who do not know, this is one of the series on health information. The purpose of today's session is to provide some education regarding monkeypox. The UK has seen unusual cases of monkeypox, which is normally spread by infected wild animals in Africa. So what is this disease and how does it spread and can be treated? You will know more about it through our very own Dr. Milind Girish, who is working in London, qualified last year with a distinction from Cambridge. Milind has previously worked on a COVID ward and is here today to deliver a workshop on current information around monkeypox. And you can do any conversation in the chat or you can ask after the session. Over to you, Dr. Milind.
Thank you very much. Could you just enable screen sharing if that's okay? I think if you click on share screen and then allow me to share my slides, I'll just start by, there we go, fantastic. Okay, and I'm assuming everyone can see my slides right now. So today, of course, we have a workshop on misinformation around COVID. The structure for today will be just about a 20 to 30 minute talk. And we'll delve into specific examples of what I've seen of misinformation already on what we know about monkeypox. And whilst going into why these pieces of information are false, we'll talk about what monkeypox is, what are the symptoms, how it's spread, the severity, and then we can explore any other questions that people have, and I'll answer to the best of my ability based on what we know so far as well. Again, if anyone wants these slides that I have and the information on them, I've always tried to include the links and the sources from which I've got information. Feel free to ask TMR and we're happy to email the slides out. So to start with, let's go into several pieces of information that I've seen across social media about concerns people have, and they come from a good place, but often these pieces of information specifically, they're not quite true, and we'll explore why that is. So one of the things I've seen is worries that monkeypox is a new virus, and we'll delve into each of these individually and explain why they're actually all false. Is monkeypox mainly found in monkeys? Is monkeypox mostly severe? Is monkeypox as contagious as COVID? Is monkeypox only affecting the LGBT community? Is wearing a mask useless in preventing monkeypox? Are we going to see different strains of monkeypox and a pandemic just like COVID? And does everyone need a vaccine to monkeypox right now? And all of these to some extent are false, and we're going to explore them one by one and then use that as a structure to discuss all the other aspects of monkeypox. So by the end, you should be clued in on what we know so far. So let's explore these two first. Is monkeypox a new virus? Actually, it's a virus we've known about since 1958. In the last few decades, it's generally stayed in and around West Africa, so around Congo and Nigeria. This diagram right here is from a paper that's linked in the bottom left. It actually shows monkeypox cases between 2010 and 2019. So not the current outbreak, it's from the past. And we can see that most cases are in and around West Africa. And interestingly, between 2010 and 2019, we actually did have a very, very small and contained outbreak in the United Kingdom of just a few cases of monkeypox that we were able to stop through track and trace techniques and isolation. So that's a bit reassuring that we've actually seen a very small and controlled monkeypox outbreak before in the UK, and we've managed to stop it. Clearly, the current one is a lot bigger than a few cases, but again, we'll discuss the differences between monkeypox and COVID in a later slide. Is monkeypox mainly found in monkeys? Well, the name monkeypox is specifically because it was first discovered in monkeys, and monkeys are involved in animal spread, particularly in West Africa, but actually the animal spread is most commonly through rodents. And animal spread is much less relevant in the UK and America and sort of Western countries, but human to human spread of monkeypox is much more relevant, and we'll discuss that a lot more. But the monkey name in monkeypox is simply based on how it was discovered rather than any main way of transmitting monkeypox. And now the current outbreak that we do indeed know about has actually been confirmed to have come from West Africa, with contact tracing identifying this, I believe, due to travel between Nigeria and the UK. So we're more or less certain about where it started from. We've known it's been around for quite a while. Now let's explore why it's called monkeypox. It's actually very related to cowpox or smallpox. You might have heard of these two, because smallpox is very famous because in particular, it's the most severe of the three that I just mentioned. But we've actually, as a human race, we've eradicated smallpox through vaccination. It's one of the only diseases that we've done that with. There's not been a single naturally occurring infection of smallpox in decades. And so we've had smallpox vaccines for many decades. We've actually stopped giving those out since about 1970s. And because we've known about monkeypox for a while, and because it's quite related to smallpox, we actually do have monkeypox vaccines as well. And we'll explore that a little more in a little bit as well. This next slide, are monkeypox cases severe? Well, as with all diseases, well, most diseases, there is a small risk of mortality. For monkeypox specifically, there are two strains that we know about that have been in and around West Africa and Central Africa for quite a while. The West African strain is actually known to be a little more mild, with a mortality around 1%. The Central African strain is a bit more severe, with mortality between 1 to 10%. Now, thankfully, the milder West African strain with a mortality of 1% is the one that we're seeing in the UK currently. And clearly that 1% mortality will vary with comorbidities and age. But it's really important to note that in particular, children and pregnant women are the ones that are higher risk. So we really don't want it spreading to children or pregnant women. Interestingly, the older population, particularly those that had been vaccinated before for smallpox, before we stopped giving those vaccines in the 1970s, they actually have some resistance to monkeypox, because the smallpox vaccine confers some protection against monkeypox because of how closely related the two are. So let's explore the symptoms of monkeypox. If we're talking about the severity, let's talk about the timeline of symptoms. Below is a diagram that I have. I'm going to explain this now. Imagine all the way on the left that that's the initial point where you have monkeypox infection. So someone is exposed to monkeypox. From that point onwards, there is a period of 1 to 2 weeks where there are no symptoms. That's called the incubation period. So from initial point of infection, there's a few weeks of no symptoms. After that point, we start seeing symptoms. That's called the prodromal period. And it's typically flu-like symptoms. So what symptoms are we talking about? We have fever and chills, aches, exhaustion, and swollen lymph nodes. So again, from the start, we have a period of no symptoms, then flu-like symptoms, and then after a few days of the flu-like symptoms, that's when you see the rash. This is the pattern of monkeypox. The rash isn't immediate. The rash is a few days into this flu-like symptom period. So to explain this a little more simply on a calendar, let's imagine that someone's first exposed to monkeypox on a Wednesday, let's say 1st of June 2022. There'll be a week or two where there's no symptoms whatsoever. So let's say perhaps on the 8th, they might start getting those flu-like symptoms that we discussed. The rash itself won't appear then for another few days. So it might be a few days after that that we see the rash. And this is very characteristic for monkeypox. So if there are cases of this, it's quite easy to identify. Thankfully, during this period where the person has been infected by monkeypox, but they don't have symptoms, so as we mentioned, this period, they don't have symptoms, they're not known to be transmissible until they have symptoms. In COVID, there seems to be a bit of an overlap where asymptomatic people can still spread. So it's very nice to know that for now, at least, we don't see spread happening in that asymptomatic period, because it's very, very difficult to track people who are spreading a disease who aren't symptomatic. So a bit of a warning, the next slide has a few images of the monkeypox rash. These aren't the worst photos that I've seen of the monkeypox rash. Some of them can be quite severe. This photo is from the NHS website itself, but if you are a bit squeamish, feel free to look away just for a few minutes. Right on the left, we have a progression over here. On the top left is what the monkeypox rash first looks like, and then it looks a bit like a sort of a vesicle, quite similar to chickenpox or syphilis, sometimes a bit bigger than the vesicles you see in chickenpox. So initially you might have this vesicle, it'll grow a bit bigger, it'll scab over, and the scab will fall off, and this will happen over the period of a week or so. Once the rash begins, it will typically spread to all parts of the body within 24 hours, becoming concentrated on the face, arms, and legs, and can be very itchy and painful. One thing to note is that unfortunately, in some cases, not all, once the scar forms after the scab falls off, the scarring can be permanent. But this is actually the case with chickenpox as well. Some individuals have permanent scarring from chickenpox, but that can be the case with monkeypox as well. Moving on from the slide of rashes, we're going to explore these 3 points here now. Is monkeypox as contagious as COVID? What's the relevance of using a mask in monkeypox? And what's the relevance of the LGBT community to monkeypox itself? So how is monkeypox spread? It's spread via fluids or contacts with the blisters that you see in monkeypox, and then indirect contact. For example, if someone with monkeypox has bedding that they've been using, and then of course some of their fluids might and the pus-filled vesicles might contact the bedding. If someone then has indirect contact with the bedding, that can be a source of infection as well. And the fluids, if they enter any broken skin, any wounds that you have or anything, or any mucous membranes, for example, if you inhale any fluids that are around a patient, for example, the large respiratory droplets that patients might produce, that can also be how you can get infected. I mentioned the large respiratory droplets in particular because aerial spread of viruses was very relevant when we were first thinking of COVID. So two of the main points of aerial spread of viruses are you can have large droplets that don't hang around in the air very long, and they don't spread around very long either. Then you have airborne aerosol spread, and COVID-19 is an example of this, where if someone, for example, sneezes, those virus particles can stick around for a very long time afterwards. This doesn't seem to be the case in monkeypox. In monkeypox, it seems to be mostly large respiratory droplets, but masks are actually still very useful for preventing inhalation of those large respiratory droplets. So if you are ever in close contact with someone with monkeypox, masks are still quite useful in preventing inhalation of any fluids that are around them through respiratory droplets in the air. But as we can see, because airborne aerosol spread is not relevant for monkeypox, with the current thought process is that monkeypox is nowhere near as contagious as COVID, which of course is a good sign. Now, what's the relevance of this point here with the LGBT community? Well, a fair few proportion of the cases that we've seen so far have been in the LGBT community, particularly in gay or bisexual men. Now, one of the reasons for this, some people were thinking, is this known to be a sexually transmitted disease? And from what we know about monkeypox so far and the decades that it's been around, it's not specifically known to be a sexually transmitted disease, but the correlation is probably just because of chance, where the first few people to be infected by monkeypox happen to be individuals of the LGBT community, and then it's just been spreading in that community specifically. And of course, if a disease is spread through fluids and close contact, sexual contact is, of course, a very, very easy way to spread that disease as well. But it's not necessarily that monkeypox will only affect the LGBT community. As we mentioned already, anyone can get this virus. Children and pregnant women particularly are at higher risk. So it's important not to label this with labels saying that only LGBT communities can get monkeypox and that sort of thing. And again, I'm going to return to a point that I touched on earlier, where that we actually had a small monkeypox outbreak in the UK in the past, where there was only a few cases. This is an article from 2018, whereby 3 individuals had monkeypox in 2018. And thankfully, due to tracking trace and isolation, we were able to stop that quite early, actually, in 2018. Clearly, currently, we have a few hundred cases, so it's a lot bigger than that back then. But we're going to explore a few other points of the difference between monkeypox and coronavirus and talk about what the future might hold for monkeypox as well. So one of the concerns that we can see online is that, are we going to see different strains of monkeypox just like we saw Delta, Omicron, COVID? And then again, what's the relevance of vaccines to monkeypox? So when we talk about coronaviruses, and we talk about monkey viruses. They are both viruses, but they're actually very different viruses. Monkeypox is what is known as a DNA virus, whereas coronavirus is an RNA virus. There's no need to go into the specifics of the differences between these, but what we know is that RNA viruses like coronavirus are much more likely to mutate than DNA viruses. And this is to do with the processes of how they're repaired. But based on this theory and what we've known of monkeypox over the last few decades, and it's been around for so many decades that we've been observing it, monkeypox should have nowhere near the mutation rate that COVID does. So we should not be seeing multiple different strains of monkeypox. It shouldn't be mutating against any treatments that we develop. And the vaccine that we've developed should be very efficacious against monkeypox and should remain efficacious as well. And I've just included below a quote from a paper that I've seen that details how DNA viruses have mutation rates of this amount, but RNA viruses often have much higher mutation rates. And that's what I mean when I say RNA viruses, I mean coronavirus, and DNA virus, I mean monkeypox. In regards to the vaccine to monkeypox, as I've said, we've had this vaccine around for quite a while. Currently, it's very unlikely that they're going to roll out vaccines for everyone. There's always a balance to be struck here whereby you don't want to be putting in the money and the manpower to vaccinate a huge proportion of the population if it's not worth it. And we've already seen how a lot of the population don't react well to being forced to have vaccines, and it can create a lot of tension. So I think the current stance is, particularly as we've only seen a few hundred cases, it's very unlikely that they're going to be rolling out monkeypox vaccines for everyone. What I have seen on the NHS website, however, is that they've been using vaccines for something called post-exposure prophylaxis. What does this mean? Well, say an individual of someone's family contracts monkeypox and it's proven to be monkeypox and they're isolating at home. Now, the rest of the family are quite at risk of getting monkeypox because it's very difficult to be around someone who has monkeypox because of the fluids and because of how they contaminate bedding and that sort of thing. It's very difficult not to get monkeypox from that point onwards. So when we say post-exposure prophylaxis, the NHS could then offer vaccines to the family around the patient who's just been infected to minimize the effects of monkeypox if they do then get it. So for example, if someone gets monkeypox, the vaccine might then be offered to the people around them, their family, close contacts, after exposure. And that might be a good way of limiting spread. So to summarize this slide, the mutation rate of monkeypox is known to be a lot lower than coronavirus. We've already touched on how monkeypox is not known to be contagious in the incubation period when there's no symptoms. So we're talking about quite a different case to coronavirus. And in terms of vaccines, vaccines may be specifically indicated for the post-exposure prophylaxis point. So it's impossible to predict the future, but hopefully based on this theory and based on this information of what we know already, we should not be seeing a global pandemic of monkeypox, and we should not be seeing different strains of monkeypox like we saw with COVID, simply because they're quite different viruses. So fingers crossed there, but that's what we know so far. Finally, I'm going to finish with this slide here, where we have an infographic from Visual Capitalist. Feel free to look at the link below. And we can just summarize everything we've discussed so far. So monkeypox is a virus that we've known about for quite a while. It's come from Central or West Africa because it's endemic there. The symptoms specifically are flu-like symptoms where you have swollen lymph nodes, muscle aches and headaches, and fever. After a few days of those symptoms, that's when the rash begins. And the whole sort of from start to finish of symptoms should be a few weeks. We have two different strains that we know about. Thankfully, the milder strain of 1% death rate is the one that we're seeing in the UK so far. We know that there's animal spread that's relevant in West Africa and Central Africa with rodents. From human to human contact, we have fluids that are the main source of transmission. And we know that we have vaccines for monkeypox currently, and there's a lot of research ongoing where they're trialing a lot of antiviral medication so that hopefully, as this does spread, when we have patients who are severely affected by monkeypox, by that point in time, we can give them medications that we know can be effective. And I believe there are a few that are coming out of the pipeline currently that are shown to reduce the severity of monkeypox and the length of duration of infection as well. So that's what we know so far. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that was informative. I'm more than happy to answer any further questions at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Milind. Before you go, I thought I'll just say thank you. And it was very, very informative. What I wanted to ask you, I've got one question, which I would like to ask you, is I was told, or we read it online, that male are more prone to getting monkeypox. Is that true?
You say males?
Male, yeah.
I haven't seen anything like that. I wonder if that is, like I mentioned, the first few cases were members of the LGBT community, specifically gay and bisexual men, just happened to be the first few people who got it, and then it spread between a small community of those individuals. I wonder if that is what has promoted that sort of viewpoint, just because we've seen a lot more men contract it. I haven't seen any specific information saying that men are more likely to get it than women, but that's quite interesting. I'd be interested to see whether there's obviously ongoing research into what's happening so far. I'm sure if that is the case, it will come across. That's very interesting.
Thank you. I've got Anita to put her hands up. So over to you, Anita.
Yes, thank you. Very interesting. And thank you for the information and giving up your valuable time. Just wanted to ask, as children, we've all had smallpox injections, etc. Are we still immune?
So actually, I don't think most of us have had smallpox injections. So we used to vaccinate everyone for smallpox decades ago.
Yes.
Yes, but the thing is what happened is, because it was such an effective vaccine and it was given out to almost the whole world, is that the virus died out, basically. There was no one for it to infect because everyone was immune, and we stopped giving the smallpox vaccination in the 70s. So it might be, I'm not sure, that was in the UK that we stopped giving it in the 70s. I'm not sure how the protocols were in other countries. For example, I was born in India. I'm not sure if my vaccinations were slightly different than the UK vaccinations. Perhaps I was vaccinated against smallpox. That would be quite interesting to know, actually. If you were vaccinated against smallpox, there is evidence that you are more resistant to monkeypox and the severity of monkeypox, so it shouldn't affect you as much. So if we were, then yes, we would be more resistant, but I don't think most of us would have been.
Well, I know I was born in India like yourselves, and they always said that if you've got those 2 or 3 rings in your arm, that is how, and that's what, I was talking about at that age. So yes, yeah.
I'm going to look into that, because that's a really interesting point, actually, whether people from different countries have had that vaccine, actually. That's really interesting. But
yes,
if you have had the vaccine, you would be more protected, yes.
More protected, yes. And then, yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nita, and thank you, Girish. Is there anybody with any questions, or shall we wind up? Thank you. Looks like nobody has got. Thank you, Milind. Thank you very much. It's Saturday, and I don't want to take much of your time. And if there is any questions, we will get back to you, and then we'll try to upload this. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Milind.
Thank you very much. Bye.
But I was just wondering.